What we get wrong about closing the racial wealth gap. Myth 1. Greater educational attainment or more work effort on the part of blacks will close the racial wealth gap. A common sense hypothesis ascribes disparities in wealth mainly to differences in the level of education. A college degree is associated with higher earnings and more stable employment, even in times of economic crisis. Families with college-educated heads appear to accumulate more wealth than families with heads with lower levels of education over a lifetime. Therefore, higher education often has been touted as the great equalizer, as a mechanism to reduce the wealth gap between whites and blacks. According to this logic, we would expect blacks and whites with similar levels of education to display comparable levels of wealth. Figure 1 summarizes our findings when we compare wealth levels for heads of households with the same educational attainment across racial groups. Both for blacks and whites, median household wealth increases as the head of household obtains higher levels of education. However, it is apparent that for blacks getting a college degree or a graduate degree is far from sufficient to close the wealth gap. At every level of educational attainment, the median wealth among black families is substantially lower than white families. White households with a bachelor's degree or postgraduate education, such as with a PhD, MD, and JD, are more than 3 times as wealthy as black households with the same degree attainment. Moreover, on average, a black household with a college-educated head has less wealth than a white family whose head did not even obtain a high school diploma. It takes a postgraduate education for a black family to have comparable levels of wealth to a white household with some college education or an associate degree. Furthermore, low family wealth can have an adverse effect on the next generation's educational attainment. Family wealth is a predictor of both college attendance and college completion. Black students are more likely to take on student loans and accumulate student loan debt, and they are more likely than white students to drop out of a university because of financial concerns. Ironically, their wealth position could deteriorate because of their intense motivation to pursue higher education. Another commonly held misconception is that black families have a cultural predisposition to undervalue education. Black families are alleged to invest insufficiently in their children's education. However, the best evidence indicates that black families, controlling for household type and socioeconomic status, tend to be more supportive than white families of their children's education through direct financial support. Black parents who provide some support for their children's higher education have 2/3 of the median net worth of white parents who provide no support for their children's higher education. For given levels of household income, parental educational attainment, and or parental occupational status, black youth also get more years of schooling and acquire more credentials than white youth whose parents have a similar status. While education does not appear to be the great equalizer, it could be argued, alternatively, that hard work can close the wealth gap. Since blacks face a higher unemployment rate than whites at every level of education, the difference in wealth ultimately could be due to the difference in employment status. If that were the case, we would observe similar levels of wealth for blacks and whites with similar employment statuses. But Figure 2 contradicts such an expectation. As one would expect, the median household wealth is higher for employed families than for unemployed families in both races. However, white households with an employed head have more than 10 times higher wealth than similar black households. Furthermore, white households with an unemployed head have a higher net worth than black households with a head who is working full-time. In addition, higher levels of household income are not associated with significant reductions in the racial wealth gap. Figure 3 shows how black families have much lower wealth than white families even when they have comparable earnings. In particular, black households in the lowest 20% of the income distribution essentially have zero net worth, while the poorest white families have on average $15,000 to $18,000 in net worth. Even belonging to the highest quintile does not make black families as wealthy as whites. Their median wealth is approximately half of that of white families in the same income quintile. The pattern is evident. Studying hard and working hard clearly is not enough for black families to make up their marginalized financial position.